Ladies and gentlemen, today it is a great pleasure for me to introduce Professor Peter Bean from Dartmouth College, a world-renowned, distinguished scholar and translator of modern Greek poetry and a specialist on the work of Nikos Kazantzakis. Professor Bean, welcome.
Thank you very much.
To our program.
Nice to be here.
Tell us a little bit about where, how, and why did you first learn modern Greek, because your Greek is impeccable.
Well, when people ask me that a lot, and where did you learn Greek, I usually say in bed, because the secret is I married a Greek from Seras region in Macedonia and lived in Greece. Fortunately, very fortunately, nobody in her family spoke a word of English, and you know, when that happens, you learn. And in fact, my wife's father was the director of a Demotic school, so he gave me the kindergarten book, the first grade, the second grade, the third. I went up to the sixth grade in the first instance, and that's how I learned Greek to begin. I'm still trying.
Wonderful.
But that's the main reason.
And why did you become interested in the Kazantzakis work? I understand you've done an extensive work on Kazantzakis.
Yes. Well, again, I think it's partly an accident. I am a professor of English and comparative literature, and when I was in graduate school at Columbia University in the 1950s, I was pursuing that and reading English novels, and very often second and third rate ones, which is what one has to do to be a specialist, right? You're not only doing Shakespeare. And a friend who was very religious, who was a Roman Catholic, said, I just discovered a book that might interest you. He knew my wife, and he knew she was Greek and that we had lived in Greece, etc. And he said, I just discovered this rather wonderful book by Nikos Kazantzakis, which is in English called The Greek Passion. It's a Christos Xanstavronete. And I read it, and it just seemed to me so much more important than really the things I was writing, the things I was reading. So I got interested. Then we went to Greece. We used to go quite often. And I went to a bookstore and I said, who is this Kazantzakis? Do you have any Kazantzakis books? And I was amazed to find, you know, a huge shelf of Kazantzakis books, most of which had never been translated, because then there were only 4 or 5 that were translated. So I just asked more, and I found the Τελευταίος Πειρασμός and began to try to read it. It was very difficult for me. Fell in love with it, and as they say, the rest is history.
So how many years, how long have you been working on Kazantzakis?
Well, all that I'm just describing now was more or less in 1958, 59. So it's, you figure it out.
40 years?
40 years.
Plus.
Yeah.
Why so long on Kazantzakis?
Well, I ask myself that sometimes. I say, am I not stuck in a rut, you know? I have done other things, many. But I'm still with Kazantzakis, and he seems to preoccupy me. I think the main reason that, and this is the important thing, is I've never gotten tired of him. And you'd think that one would, you know, even of great authors. The main reason is that in order to study Kazantzakis, in order to work with Kazantzakis, you can't just do Kazantzakis. You have to know Nietzsche, Bergson, Homer, Dante, the whole history of Europe from 1900 to 1950, the Russian Revolution, Lenin. You know, where do you stop? He's a whole education. So the more you do with him, you know, the Glossikozitima, everything, he touched everything. Greek history, Venizelos, everybody. In order to work with Kazantzakis, you have to be a kind of eclectic scholar. So the more you are, the wider and the more interesting it gets, instead of the narrower and less interesting. I think that's what sustained it for me. And in fact, what I'm going to do tonight is a relatively new part of the same phenomenon, that suddenly, due to somebody else, a theologian who contacted me, I discovered that Kazantzakis is a process theologian. Now, what does that mean? I had to go and find out. And this has been mainly my approach in the last few years, which I never did before. And it's opened up a whole new area, which to me impacts other parts of my life, not just Kazantzakis.
Professor, in addition to translations of Report to Greco, Last Temptation of Christ, you have translated Mirivilis' The Life in Tomb.
Yes.
What principles are guiding your translations?
You mean the choice of books or the actual technique of translation?
The actual technique of translation.
Well, I want to speak to both of those. The choice, well, I think I can describe myself as a pacifist. And the Zoe and Tafel is one of the great anti-war books. And I read that and I said, I have to translate this. I want the world to be able to read this book from a kind of pacifist conviction. So there was an agenda there, you know. I am religious, and I felt an agenda with Kazantzakis. So that's part of the answer. In technique, you know, it's very difficult to answer that question, but I think if one is forced to answer it, the major thing that I want to do as a translator is to make something that works in the new language, in English, in this case. If it doesn't work in English, there's no use doing it. So you do then take liberties. You might change things, and I did, and you know, I confess to that if people challenge me. But you also have to be responsible, and in a sense, you know, not sloppy, not to make mistakes. You don't add things, you don't subtract things, but you can change. I changed Kazantzaki's sentence structure, for example. It just doesn't work in English. Things like that. So that's the major principle, is to create something that's appropriate to your language, your culture.
Well, Professor, thank you very much. It has been a great pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.
And we're looking forward to enjoying your lecture.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Thank you.